Hello, everybody. This is Mrs. G's Story Time, and we are reading The Tanglewood Secret by Patricia Sanjan, by permission of Moody Publishing Company. We're on Chapter 16, Hops and Mushrooms. The summer holidays were especially exciting that year because my aunt gave us permission for the first time to spend some afternoons in the hops fields, where we earned quite a lot of money. We had given up saving for the camera, and our idea was to earn enough money to buy a warm blanket for Terry. Aunt Margaret had suggested it, as she didn't actually have one to spare herself. But she gave other little things for him, and she mended Philip's old pajamas, which were thick and warm. Mr. Robinson also promised to go and see Terry. On one of our many Saturday visits, Philip and I had told him about Terry and had begged him to call. You see, I explained, I've tried to tell him about the Good Shepherd, but he doesn't want to listen. He says if God loved him, he'd make his back better and let him run about again. And when he said that, I didn't know what to say. But if you came, you could explain it to him all nicely, I expect, couldn't you? Mr. Robinson smiled. No, he answered, I couldn't explain it at all, because when sad things happen in our lives, he often doesn't tell us why. And if we really love him, we must believe what he says, even if we don't understand. That is what trust means. In any case, Terry would probably listen to you more than he would listen to me because you're a child like himself and I'm only a grown-up. But he doesn't listen, I insisted. He doesn't take any notice of me at all. He just tells me to talk about something else. Well then, Mr. Robinson replied, you must start praying every day that he will listen. God doesn't always answer our prayers at once, but he hears them. And if they are right prayers, he will always answer them in the end. Philip and I loved the hops fields with the noisy pickers and the strange smell that clung to our clothes and fingers. At 6 o'clock, we would line up for our pay and feel so important grown-up when our money was handed out to us. Once a family from Birmingham invited us to stay for supper with them, and we sat around a glowing fire. They cooked a strange sort of pancake in a large frying pan. It smelled delicious, and when it was tossed on the tin pan and handed to us, we thought we'd never tasted anything so good. We found another way of earning money, too, when Aunt Margaret thought was better than hop picking. One misty September morning, we got up early and ran out into the silver fields where the spiders were covering the grass with their webs. We took off our shoes and socks because we liked the feel of the cold dew between our toes, and we were skipping up and down the fields when Philip suddenly stopped. He caught sight of a little white button mushroom, and he stooped down to look underneath to make sure it wasn't a puffball. Mushrooms, Ruth, he called. Let's see if we can find some more. We found lots more. In fact, the field was full of them, big ones and little ones, and we heaped them up until we could have filled a whole basket, only we had no basket. There's only one thing to do, Philip remarked. You must take off your vest and tie the sleeves in a knot so it makes a bag. You must get these mushrooms home somehow. When my vest had been filled up with mushrooms, it began to stretch, and by the time we reached home, it had grown so long that it almost touched the ground. We were going to give some to Aunt Margaret to cook, and we were going to ask whether we might sell the rest to the greengrocer up the road. Aunt Margaret was pleased with the mushrooms, but she was not at all pleased with my vest. She said it was enough to give me a bad chill, and it was ruining good underwear. So I was given a dose of medicine in case I should catch a cold and made to wash the vest, which made me sulky all breakfast time. When I cheered up later, when we were asked Aunt Margaret if we might sell the rest of the mushrooms to Mr. Daniels, the greengrocer, she said she did not mind at all as long as we took them in a proper basket. So we set out, highly excited, marched up to the counter, and asked to see Mr. Daniels personally. Mr. Daniels was fat and bald, and wore hard-rimmed spectacles on the end of a large red nose. He liked Philip and me, and he beamed at us over the counter. When he saw our mushrooms, he threw up his hands in admiration. "Dearie me," said Mr. Daniels, "I'll weigh 'em out and pay you the same as I pay the farmers, and if you find any more, you bring 'em along to Mr. Daniels." Well, we did find lots more, and by picking mushrooms and the hops and the money box began to get really heavy again. We were beginning to talk about the color of the blanket we would buy. When a wonderful thing happened. We had wandered over the hills in the heat to take Terry some plum, and we found him alone. The house was more stuffy than usual, and Terry looked hot and flushed. His dark hair lay in damp locks on his forehead, and he had thrown all his bedclothes off. He did not notice us when we came in because he was staring so hard at the wall opposite, where his mother had hung the picture I had given to her. "Hello, Terry," we greeted him, sitting ourselves down on the bed. "Is your mother out?" Answered Terry wearily. Poor Terry, he seemed so excited that even our arrival didn't cheer him up. "She's been gone a long time." "Where to?" we asked. "Don't know," replied Terry. "She wouldn't say." There was a pause, and then Terry spoke up again in a fretful voice. "Take that picture away with you," he commanded. "It really bothers my mom. It's the last few days she sort of cries when she looks at it. She was happier before you brung it, and we don't want it." "But I can't take it away," I objected. "It's your mother's, and I gave it to her. It would be sort of stealing to take it away." Terry passed his head wearily over his forehead, and turned his face to the wall. "I wish I was dead," he muttered. We had never seen Terry quite so unhappy before, and we longed to comfort him. But what could we say to comfort a boy who had to lie in a hot, cheerless gloom all day long? Even when we offered him a plum, he pushed it away. "I'm feeling sick," he explained. "Maybe I'll eat it later." We left very soon because he seemed too tired to want us. His mother had not returned, and we felt very depressed as we climbed the hill. "Philip," I said, "do you still pray every day that Terry will get better?" "Not every day," answered Philip, "because sometimes I feel sure he won't. I mean, perhaps God thinks he'd better not get better. The doctor said he wouldn't, and and the doctors are usually right." "But God could do a miracle," I insisted, "like he did in the Bible. It seems too awful, doesn't it? Terry seems sadder every time we see him. This isn't really being ill. That's the worst part." Philip said seriously, "It's that awful little house. It's so hot and dark, and there's a nasty smell about it, and it must be so dull and boring. And if he could be ill somewhere nice, it would be different." I could find no way out of this difficulty at all unless we prayed that someone with a nice house would adopt Terry. When we thought about it a bit more, we decided not to pray for that after all, as Terry would hate to leave his mother and his mother would hate to lose him. We were talking so seriously about it all when we reached the gate that we did not look where we were going and nearly bumped into Aunt Margaret, who was coming down the path talking to a tall woman in a dark cloak. We looked quickly into our visitor's face, and to our utter astonishment we saw that the tall woman was Terry's mother, and her dark eyes were red with weeping. Stranger still, my aunt was talking gently to her and had laid her hand on her arm. Neither of them took any notice of us, and we went indoors quickly because we somehow felt that Terry's mother hadn't really wanted to meet us at all. Once inside, we looked at each other in astonishment. What could Aunt Margaret and Terry's mother have been saying to each other? "Perhaps she's asking for things for Terry," I suggested. Philip shook his head. "I don't think that's it," he said, "because Auntie was being so nice to her. Usually she's rather cross with beggars." If she had hoped that my aunt would explain things, and we were disappointed. She came back into the house a few minutes later, and we went upstairs to her bedroom. When she came down, she was very quiet and took no notice of us at all. I thought her face was sadder than usual, and she seemed to be thinking hard. Next day at breakfast, another surprise awaited us, and Aunt Margaret laid down her knife and fork and looked at her watch. "Ruth," she announced, "I'm going out for the morning. It's very important, and I shall probably not be back for some hours, so I am going to let you get the dinner. The potatoes are peeled, and there's a cold meat, so you'll only have to wash the lettuce and peel and stew the apples and make some custard. I showed you how to make custard the other day, so it will be a good chance to try." Philip and I stared at her in astonishment. Never before that we could remember had our aunt gone out for the morning or missed cooking the dinner. It must have been very important business that called her, and we really wanted to know what it could be. Aunt Margaret was as good as her word. She got up from the breakfast table, put on her hat, and walked straight out the front door. And that was the last we saw her until dinner time. Philip and I, left by ourselves, went to work with a will. I really liked the idea of being the mistress of the house for the morning, and we carried the breakfast things out and started to wash up and feeling very important. I began tipping nearly a whole jar of soap flakes into the bowl and whisking until the foam stood up nearly as high as the taps, and after that, of course, we had to spend 10 minutes or so scooping it out with our hands and blowing soap bubbles all over the kitchen. The morning passed very happily, and Philip and I peeled enough potatoes to feed an army, and although I burnt the saucepan badly while making the custard, it didn't taste much. We caught 3 little slugs in the lettuce and carried them carefully back out to the lettuce patch in case their mothers might be missing them. When we felt the dinner was prepared properly, we started on the housework. We took all the rugs into the garden and danced up and down with them and smothering ourselves with dust. Yes, it was certainly great fun being left in charge of the house. The morning went very fast, and it seemed only a very short time before Aunt Margaret walked in the gate. It was dinner time. I made a dive for the potatoes, which were boiling merrily, and the dinner was served up in a very flash. Untidy little cook who had to be sent away from the table to brush her hair the minute grace had been said. However, my aunt seemed pleased with my efforts. She praised the potatoes and the salad and said nothing about the burnt flavor of the custard. She looked happy, too, much happier than she had looked at the breakfast. And now and then we noticed her smiling to herself as she thought she had some very nice secret. "I hope you enjoyed this morning, Auntie," said Philip politely. Aunt Margaret's eyes twinkled and a little smile turned up at the corners of her mouth again. "I've enjoyed myself very much indeed, thank you, Philip," she replied seriously. After a moment she added, "Tonight, when Uncle Peter comes home and I've talked to him, I'm going to tell you about it. But till then, it's a secret." Philip and I were very interested. When evening came, we kept running out into the road to see if Uncle was coming. When at last we saw him approaching, we dashed madly into the kitchen. "He's coming, Auntie," we shouted. "Now! The secret! The secret!" She shooed us both out of the kitchen with a wooden spoon. "Get along with you," she said. "I can't make fish cakes and talk secrets at the same time. You tell your uncle to come here, and then you run out into the garden." So Uncle Peter went in and shut the door. Tomorrow will be Chapter 17, The Secret. We'll find out what the secret is. I love you, and I'm praying for you. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.